Hello everyone, I'm Peiyao, and today I'm going to talk about experimental films in the 60s. As we know, today's public's aesthetics and orientation towards films has changed a lot. Many of us grew up with watching modern film industrial products. To be honest, movies in the 1960s are not the first choice for most people, and experimental movies are even more unpopular. It is difficult for us to restore the values and aesthetics of 1960s, but we can still try our best to understand people's exploration and efforts in movies almost 60 years ago. So please don't use current standards to judge those movies. Remember that they don't have nice computers, Final Cut Pro, or high-tech cameras. Today I chose three completely different films. They have almost nothing in common except they're all experimental films. There are two or three things I know about her: 2001: A Space Odyssey and Heaven and Earth's Magic. The reason I chose two or three things I know about her is because it is a typical experimental movie and it comes from our class. I think its editing method and the way it tells a story is very unique. The reason I chose 2001: A Space Odyssey is because this movie is beyond the times. Many of the shots and concepts are still very advanced today. The philosophical concepts in this movie are still very interesting. Although people usually define it as a sci-fi movie, I think the shots, the editing, the music, and deep meaning are good enough to be defined as an experimental movie, of course for 60s. The reason I chose Heaven and Earth's Magic is because it is so unique. When I saw this movie, I feel like I was thrown into a wormhole then completely lost in time. Please forgive me. I think it is a great experimental movie, but it's too weird. I think this movie truly proves that the pioneers tried all the possibilities, especially this one. Now let's analyze this movie from three dimensions: mise-en-scène, editing, and sound-image relations. In 2001: A Space Odyssey, the setting of the shot is very elegant and professional. At the beginning, we can see a lot of wide-angle shots. Each frame is very beautiful, even if it's judged by today's standards, it still will be recognized by people. The whole movie's vision of the future is not only very scientific, but also far-sighted. The details in the space are falling in line with the setting. We can see radical artificial intelligence, advanced space science, and even philosophy at the end of the science. Monkeys have become humans, and humans have become children. This is almost a rethinking of time and space from the very bottom. The shots in the movie are very clean, and this feeling of emptiness and tranquility runs through the whole movie. The editing of the film is very rigorous. Although the overall is relatively slow, you can feel that the director is trying to force audience to think by extending the time of the single shot. Such strategy leads to the movie making people sleepy, but I think it's worth it. I think the sound of the whole movie matches the image very well, especially the same classical music that's used at the beginning and the end, which hints the origin and evolution of living things. This is classic among classics. In general, I think the director used a very rigorous technique to make this movie. Every frame is very clean, just like its sound. Details are everywhere, secrets everywhere. Such a complicated setting itself is a challenge to traditional movies. I think this is the most experimental part. In two or three things I think about her, I think the director is trying to restore real world in his mind. The default wall in the movie is broken. The actors are no longer just actors, they are characters, and the characters are them. In a busy and a complex world, many details have been restored. The actors speak to the camera, the narrators will explain the problem, everything is natural, just like you will not refuse Deadpool to talk to you in the movie. real environment, real feedback, a method that shouldn't have worked has worked. I think this is a method of breaking the old principles. It's very good. The editing of this film is very experimental. The director adds some other images in the middle of the video, which almost violates the principle of traditional movies. But this kind of editing gives people room to think. Some pictures seem to fit in people's dialogues and even reflects people's psychological conditions. I think this kind of editing may be distracting, but it is indeed a bold attempt. The sound and picture of this movie mainly reflect reality. You can really hear music, just like real life, noisy environment, people talking. This kind of realism can easily make people think this is reality. The color of the image is a little bit saturated, and it looks very retro, and the warm tone image will make people feel close, and I think this is also a plus. Generally speaking, I think the experimental method of this film is mainly to reflect the real sense of a normal people, of course, in a way of the directors. It's time for Heaven and Earth's Magic. Let's look at a few shots first. I understand that you must be very confused right now because I showed you some very strange clips. I guess it is very similar to the world that someone sees after eating poisonous mushrooms. And I also want to tell you that such a movie will last more than 60 minutes. All kinds of shapes, all kinds of objects. They constantly interact with each other, and you can hear gunshots, crying children, the sounds of machines, and so on. Most audience simply cannot understand what they are watching, and I think this is the most experimental part of this movie. The movie is actually logical, but because the objects are too abstract, so it is very difficult for people to try to understand this movie. The pictures are very delicate, all the transformations are very smooth, and you can see almost all the details. Most objects have their own ways of interacting, which is almost a miracle. This is a movie 60 years ago, and they don't have advanced technology to help them to create it. Considering the complexity of the entire project, it is also an experiment itself. All the sound in the movie match the objects in the pictures, so the time is also very accurate. It seems like everything is in a reasonable way. The only unreasonable thing is that you sit in front of the laptop and watch this abstract movie for more than 60 minutes. Generally speaking, I think this movie is experimental regardless of the production method, the movie itself, or the audience. Even watching this movie is experimental. I don't think such a movie will become mainstream, but it's a brave attempt. At least it proves that movies can also be like this.